I am pleased to welcome you to a presentation by Henry Cooke titled William Waine, Tailor to the Common Man. Henry has been researching and recreating historical costume for 35 years. A historian with a graduate degree in American social history from Tufts University, Henry learned to sew at an early age and began making uniform clothing for members of the 10th Massachusetts Regiment, a reenactment unit he helped to found in 1977 and which he led for 18 years. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Henry Cooke.
Wow, that's a great introduction, Erica. Thank you very much. Any questions? That was a great presentation. So now we can, I guess I got to speak now. I thank you for coming to the lunchtime series at Old South Meeting House. And perhaps the best way to introduce you to William Waine Tailor, to the common man of Boston, is to present him as he would have appeared in his workplace, in his shop, sitting cross-legged on his bench, working on a rug greatcoat. I had hoped to have it finished in time for somebody to wear today, but instead somebody's just going to have to wear a beautiful scarlet superfine cloak instead, which is much prettier. But this is much more, this green rug broadcloth, which I will pass around in a little bit during my presentation, is much more akin to the types of cloth and clothing worn by the sailors, the dock workers, the working class people of Boston that were served by William Waine and the world that he lived in. William Waine, as far as we know, and from my first slide over my shoulder, this is one of my favorite images of Boston. Joseph Badger's 1739 view of Boston from, I believe, Dorchester Heights. I like it because in so many ways it literally looks out over the water, onto the docks, onto the people, into the world of William Waine. The south end of Boston was his world, though, as we shall find, his place in history is an interesting one in that his workplace, as we shall soon see, has important intersections with history. William Waine entered into the life. We don't have a lot of information about his early life, but we do know that he spent his early years in Boston. He came up through the apprentice system probably in the 1720s. This is my first test. You got to turn it on. That helps. Hey, I'm a tailor, not a technologist. Captain Bonner's map gives us a wonderful view of a Boston very different from the town we're familiar with today. A long peninsula that extends out, and we will see the wharves jutting out into Boston Harbor, all along the shoreline facing the harbor. This was the neighborhood that Waine grew up in. These were the people he would have been interacting with on a regular basis. The dock workers. Here we have a close-up view. Fort Hill. We will later see King Street, site of an infamous incident in 1770. Depending on your politics, either serves them right or the opening salvo in what would become the American Revolution. Cornhill Street, Winter Street, Summer Street, Milk Street. Here's Old South. This was the world that Waine would have been familiar with. Long Lane. Long Lane in the Bonner map hadn't extended all the way through to King Street as yet. One of William Waine's associates, Thomas Marshall, a man who would become a selectman and a mover and shaker in Boston politics, lived on Long Lane and would have been a familiar of Waine's. They both were born around the same time. Both actually Marshall was a younger man compared to Waine, and so perhaps may have apprenticed with William Waine. We know there were many young men apprenticing with Waine. He has his shop his shop moves around, finally ends up in King Street. Like I said, technology is not my strong suit. But he's got a long row of buildings, and we don't know exactly where upon King Street he may have had his shop. That is grist for further research. The source of our information for today's presentation comes from a series of folio account books and octavo account books and loose documents at the American Antiquarian Society. They tell us a great deal about the life of Waine, not only his professional life as a tailor and merchant, and indeed we would call him a merchant tailor because he not only makes what is known as bespoke clothing that's made to measure, but he also is making and selling ready-made clothing. He is also hiring other tailors to work for him, doing piecework, as we will get into as we move forward. But this is an account from August 29th, 1760, and forgive me, the purchase of a 3-foot mahogany table, for which he paid with merchandise from his store. This is an era when Boston is a small town, only, I think, less than 20,000 souls. So you have a large number of people on a small peninsula. In the south end of Boston, many people very close together. You know a lot of people fairly well. There is not a lot of hard coinage. Most of the hard coin, the gold and silver coin, is intended to go out for transactions with London, with foreign transactions. Those of us working within the town work through a series of transactions, credit transactions, small amounts of cash, and merchandise and work for hire. In this case, Waine pays for Mr. Salisbury for his beautiful table with goods from his store. In 1755, we find he's getting on in years. He's a middle-aged man now. He suffers the scourge of many of us middle-aged men, thinning hair, and he also wants to be fashionable, so he now has a light gray wig for which he paid £1 16 shillings. That was a pretty good, that is a couple of months' wages for an average working tailor. For a merchant tailor such as Waine, this would be maybe a week's wages. So it is a week's income. He is buying and selling merchandise. This is also, you'll note, this is also in lawful money, which is not the sterling. Sterling, it is actually a discounted version of sterling currency. Lawful money was the local value of transactions, what you value your work and your time and your materials at, as opposed to the value of gold and silver, which are going to be dictated by the larger economy. I refer to this portion of the account book as the Mackerel Accounts. In the 1760s, the Waine family, now consisting of 2 girls and 2 boys, one young adult who was already going out to sea in the early 1760s and becomes a merchant himself. They seem to be on the mackerel diet. I don't know what that does for you. It probably gives you a curious breath, but mackerel was an important part of the diet. It was readily caught by fishermen working out of the South End. And then an autumn chore. He's a house owner. He's a house renter. He never owns his own property. Throughout the 1730s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we have accounts of Waine renting a variety of houses and portions of houses in the South End, usually in the vicinity of the Long Lane area, but not always. In this case, he was required to both pay rent, but also maintain the property. And here on October 18th, he pays for whitewashing and mending of the plaster in the house that he's living in to Mr. Brazier. Mr. Brazier's grandson would eventually go on. This is where I give you my historical note as town historian for the town of Randolph. Mr. Brazier's son, grandson William S. Brazier, actually was a painter who lived on School Street and did trompe-l'oeil work throughout southern New England in the 1870s. My town hall being one of the buildings that was so treated. Let's move on. Interestingly enough, a revelation. 1763, William Waine apparently is doing well enough to be able to spend 28 pounds, 13 shillings, and 4 pence for a young Negro boy, probably about 12 or 13 years of age, trainable in the tailoring trades. We find him showing up in the accounts with his shoemaker for shoes for William Waine, his 2 sons, his 2 daughters, his wife, and the Negro. And he is always referred to as the Negro boy. He is never referred to by name. Beyond that, we know very little about him and the life he had with the Waine family. We also know he liked to get around, and from time to time he would invest in horse flesh, because he purchased, at least in the time period covered by the account books from 1737 to 1773, in Waine's hand, we know he owned at least 5 different horses. He owned a gray mare, a red sorrel, a roan mare, or roan horse, and a black horse, and what was the other one? I can't remember the last horse, but he owned a number of horses, which also required him to rent stable space or barn space and pasturage to keep the horse in. As he gets on in years, towards the end of his life, he gives up horses and riding, and when he needs a horse or carriage, he hires it out from one of his customers, part of his business transactions. And lastly, in 1757, there's a war on. He's part of the town militia company, and he buys a gun. By a gun, most likely a long arm, a musket, fitted out with a bayonet, as was required by province law, capable of firing 16 ball to the pound, which would reckon it on a par with a standard British Army Brown Bess. And here we have a cartoon of a local militia company marching through town. You can tell the cartoonist had a rather dim view of the militia, made up of the old, the lame, the overweight, the overtired, the overworked, but having nice uniforms and cobbled together nonetheless. He also was an investor in a mortar. I can't imagine what he needed that for in his own home. It's not the sort of thing you use to ward off burglars. You might put it down on the waterfront and try to bombard a French Navy vessel. Again, it's more information that he was serving with the militia at the time. More barrels of mackerel, and enough of the mackerel. Fishermen were an important part of his clientele. Here we have a Paul Sandby watercolor of a fisherman and his wife selling their wares to sundry, and a little child with a little dog. a cute little picture. But he wears, again, Waine makes reference to the making and selling of leather breeches, stockings, half gaiters, called spatterdashes, jackets, many short jackets, which we will talk about momentarily, and a variety of caps, woolen caps, silk caps, hair caps, and even what were referred to as horsehair caps. I'd like to know more about those. More research needed. That may be a future presentation. And then his tailor's accounts. And in this particular, last of the household accounts, this is William Waine as public citizen, living on King Street with his shop and his house nearby. He pays Edward Winter, who I believe Winter Street is named for. Edward Winter was a blacksmith in Boston, and he is repairing building a new pump handle and parts for the public pump, which would have been on King Street, both for the purposes of providing potable water for the public and also for fire protection. Let's move forward a little more quickly. And then finally, accounts of his shop on King Street, where he is from at least 1761 into the 1770s. His shop, like many others, would have had a number of working men, young men working for him, but also young women. And much of his work, we find from the accounts, was hired out. Over the period, especially in the 1740s and 1750s, I find accounts for at least 3 different women who were working for Waine and 4 different men. They may have been working out of their own shop, or they would have been working in his shop on King Street. Waine most likely would have been handling the bespoke work, measuring his clients with a paper measuring tape, a parchment tape such as this, and use of a pair of shears. Part of your learning as a young apprentice was in the taking of measures, whereby you notch your tape, take a measure along the body, say to the length to the waist, and make a snip. Take another measure to the, say, to the top of the knee, make 2 snips, and so on and so forth, until you have a series of coded cuts and snips, each representing a different measure on the body of the wearer of the garment, of the person you're making the garments for. And this would be for every different garment you are making. You would have 1 tape for a coat, 1 tape a little tighter for waistcoats, 1 for breeches. These, we'll hold questions till the end, sir. Thank you. We got more ground to cover still. Accounts with William Greenleaf. William Greenleaf is a Boston merchant, sells a wide variety of merchandise. He is importing woolens from England along with silks from China and Spitalfields in London. He is also getting linens from Ireland, Belgium, and Eastern Europe. Here we see the types of transactions that would take place, both cash and merchandise. Here we have alamode, black alamode handkerchiefs, shoes, stays for his wife. These were purchases William Waine made for both his wife and one of his daughters. There is, in another account, pink lustring for a gown and pink alamode silk. Apparently pink was a popular color. Also, there was pink calamanco for a man's waistcoat or a woman's gown. Other accounts, these are accounts of William Waine. One of the things that makes him unique amongst tailors, in this case, his account with Samuel Partridge, a mariner. Waine, throughout his career, identifies his clients by both name and by oftentimes residency and occupation. In this case, Mr. Partridge was a mariner, and we can find in the accounts that of clothing he purchased a lined set, A lined settee jacket, such as what I'm wearing. We don't know what a settee is. Apparently it is a type of woolen garment made of a stout woolen cloth. I've talked to the people at the Constitution Museum and many of my other living history geeks and who do extensive research, and other historians. No one has yet come up with an answer for me. But settee seems to be both the type of fabric it was made from and the type of garment. And it seems like either a short-waisted coat, often single or double-breasted. He also wore under it he also got 12 serge waistcoats, 12 fine waistcoats, 12 white spotted settee waistcoats, 12 pair of shag breeches. I'm wearing a shag waistcoat. This is a wool waistcoat with a long, lustrous nap that would keep you good and warm, well suited for men working in outdoor environments, either on shipboard, on docks, and these constitute a large part of the people he works for. Also a pair, of honeycombed shag breeches. Honeycomb was a printed velvet or printed shag plush type material, printed with a pattern, so printed to look like a honeycomb. So you could work hard and look nice. Very important. In all likelihood, Partridge is a ship owner or the head of a ship's company. 12 men would outfit a small ship, and perhaps something like Captain Graham, as portrayed by Hogarth, with his different members of his ship's company, his servant, his gray wig, his banyan, and his working clothes, and his nice cap when he's not wearing his wig. The lesser sort of sailor may do with trousers, which seems to be the standard wear for many men working on the docks, whereas gentlemen and other working artisans would wear breeches. Trousers, we find extensive accounts of trousers. This is an account of a sailor with his jacket, his waistcoat. He's home visiting the ladies, making a good impression. This is how Waine would pay for things like wood. Again, he kept his accounts in an account book, but he also sometimes would have a bill that would show the transactions. In this case, cords of wood in 1760 for various amounts of cord wood that he paid to Mr. Hersey, and for which he paid by a greatcoat valued at £4 9 shillings 0 pence, and then cash paid £6 15 shillings, for a total of 31 shillings 2 and 6 for all that cordwood, enough to get him well through the winter. So now we know how much it took to heat his house and his shop. This is a typical greatcoat. This is another Paul Sandby watercolor showing a gentleman in a double-breasted greatcoat, double-breasted to exclude the cold. We find a number of accounts for cloaks. Waine either makes or sells cloaks. This is on screen is a cloak that was made for Artemus Ward, who at the outbreak of the American Revolution was Commander-in-Chief of the Massachusetts Army. This is a replica of a cloak that was worn by a militia officer out of New Preston, Connecticut, which is in the collections of Yorktown Victory Center. Underneath it is a laced waistcoat similar to one mentioned by Waine in his accounts, made for an officer in the Boston militia, richly laced in gold. And he makes note of the scarlet waistcoat and trimmings. We presume because he was a militia officer, the trimmings were gold. We also come across accounts for ratteen banyans. Ratteen was a heavy woolen cloth, worsted in wool blend. that was very much favored for dressing gowns, for linings of outdoor coats, and also for banians. These are two banians from an English collection, one a fitted wool banian from around 1780, another a print cotton, of which my colleague, Mr. Lazaro, sitting in the audience tonight, has a beautiful one in the collections at Historic Deerfield that is not dissimilar from this marvelous garment. And I invite you to go out to the Flint Center, now celebrating its 50th anniversary, and see the glories of textile history and collecting in the Connecticut Valley in their lovely museum. And where I will be on the 17th of October, so you can see me hard at work on my workbench. Waine also makes a number of coats, camlet coats, duffle coats. This is a coat made from wool camlet. This is a wool coat from an English collection made of wool duffle. Duffle was a thick, coarse, heavyweight woolen cloth worn by farm laborers, working men. Duffle greatcoats show up in the Waine accounts. This duffle jackets, this is a duffle sailor, double-breasted sailor's jacket, of which numerous accounts in the Waine papers are found. This is a duffle coat with self-covered buttons, very typical of clothing worn at mid-century here in Boston. There is a Calamanco waistcoat mentioned in the accounts, made for Mr. James Ferreter, who was a I've lost my train of thought. Mr. Ferreter was a wharfinger. So Calamanco was a glazed worsted wool fabric. This is in a private collection. Also plush breeches. These are a pair of striped plush breeches in the collections at Winterthur in Delaware. This is a pair of wool plush breeches that are currently under construction that I hope to be wearing in a few weeks. And I'm going to start passing out garments for show and tell, because I told Erica that we would do this, and I know I'm watching the clock, so I want to move along. But just to give you a sense of the textiles, the duffle, also linsey, waistcoats and breeches, very common parts of working Bostonians wear. Stockings are a big part of the inventory of the William Waine shop. He doesn't make them, but he sells them. This is a pair of clouded stockings worn by James Law at the Battle of Bunker Hill in a private collection. Benjamin Green, another local merchant, his accounts, again, outfitting ships companies and dock workers, rope workers, people like Mr. Ferreter, who worked on Boston Common or in the rope works. These are the people that populate the south end of Boston. These are the young men and older men who are involved in the Pope's Day celebrations, knocking heads and having a good party afterwards. These are also the very same people who are working for people like John Hancock and Sam Adams. One of Waine's accounts is with John Hancock. Here's an example of one of those accounts. He is supplying clothing to Mr. Hancock, lined bays, duffle surtouts, lined bays, ditto, swanskin, ermine linsey dittos. Ermine actually having a fur trim. Milled serge waistcoats, white and blue drawers. Again, these men in the cold, they have to layer their clothing to keep them warm. Milled jackets and again, the ubiquitous rug greatcoat. Thomas Marshall, another South End resident, another merchant tailor who was about 10 years younger than Waine, also working and may have apprenticed with William Waine early in his career. Maritime clothing, I'm going to move quickly through. Trousers again, short jackets, neck cloths around the neck. Waine sells all of these out of his shop, along with a popular item, this overshirt, a frock, typically worn by dock workers when loading and unloading ships for extra warmth. Oops. Moving forward in time, more sailor's dress. Milled caps. This is a milled sailor's cap on this young tough, protesting the Stamp Act 250 years ago this year, and a minister and a merchant who is observing the non-importation agreements. All of these being clients of William Waine, not the hapless stamp and tea salesman who is being tarred and feathered. And lastly, Waine's people are involved in the Stamp Act protests. They're involved in, many of them, in the events that took place here on the night of December 16th, 1774, or 1773, excuse me, which led to the closing of the port of Boston. They were also, many of the men, called upon to protest, and were out on the streets of the night of March 5th, 1770. Perhaps Waine himself, like Thomas Marshall, bore witness to this scene. Whoops. The Boston Massacre, which took place at the head of King Street. Waine may have been, we don't know, he didn't keep a diary, and he's late in his life, and the accounts begin to run out at that point. So much to know, so much more to learn. I've only given you a quick snapshot. I'm going to pass out some rug lined with bay. This is the rug greatcoat that I had hoped that somebody was going to get to play with. Look out. We do live theater here, and you never know what I'm going to do next. So I thank you for coming to our presentation. I hope I've given you a very quick introduction to William Waine and his world, the people who populated it, and the clothing they wore. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes?
I'm just curious as to what they wore in the summer.
What did they wear in the summer? Excellent question. Lighter weight variants of what they wore in the winter. The average working class Bostonian, and we know this from probate accounts, typically had a greatcoat, which often served as his outer coat, a jacket, which was a sleeved waistcoat. He might have a serge waistcoat, which was a lighter weight woolen waistcoat, a linsey waistcoat. We saw a reference to those ermine linsey waistcoats. They were also linen, Ticklenburg, and ticking waistcoats and breeches are also mentioned. These are stout linen cloths or hemp cloths that were well suited for working class wear, which were both launderable and would keep you comfortable and safe while working. Yes, sir, and you had a question.
So in one of the earlier photographs, the apprentices were sitting on the table.
That's correct.
Explain that.
Why? The question is, why sit cross-legged on my workbench? Because by 1770 or by even the 1720s, it's tradition. It's what we've been doing for over a century. Prior to that time, tailors sat at a low workbench similar to a cobbler's shoemaker's bench. But somewhere in the 17th century, tailors started sitting cross-legged on their bench, and it was a tradition that continued well into the 19th century, and in some places is still being done today. It is a practical posture because you can lay your work across your lap and have the use of both hands, whereas if you're sitting at a table, you have to carry the whole load of the cloth in your arms. And that's fine if you're working on a linsey waistcoat. If you're working on a rug greatcoat, which weighs several pounds, and is thick and heavy, especially when you line it with bay. Those of you who have pocket flaps, there were several references to bay or bays. The pocket flap lining, that coarse, scratchy, tabby weave worsted wool, that is the standard lining material for military and civilian working people's clothing. The better sorts, Mr. Greenleaf and Benjamin Green and Thomas Marshall, gentlemen, all wore velvets. They wore finer quality wools, wool superfines such as this, which you're welcome to come up with after the presentation, try the garments on, and feel the difference. Their garments were typically lined with silk. They were lined with a glazed worsted wool known as shalloon, which was a thinner, smoother, finer quality cloth, which would line the better quality garments and have greater slipability. For the working men in the south end of Boston, working on Bass's Wharf, working on Green's Wharf, working on shipboard, on the ships, many ships coming and going for the merchants, working on John Hancock's ship, these clothes were their livelihood, and typically they might have a greatcoat, 2 or 3 waistcoats, a pair of heavy breeches, a pair of light breeches, a pair of spatterdashes to keep the mud out of their shoes and off their stockings, and 2 shirts and 3 pair of stockings, and a hat. And either a knit cap or a felt cap, and William Waine sold them both. So thank you very much. You're welcome to come up and handle the goods and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
At the time Grenville proposed and Parliament passed the Sugar Act, Grenville had a list of other proposals, and one was a Stamp Act, which he thought might be needed at some point unless the colonies figured out a way to raise a revenue on their own.